This video is sponsored by Card Kingdom. Go to cardkingdom.com to buy all kinds of Magic products, including Ultimate Masters. Hello everyone, I'm Nitzahone, and today I'm bringing you a bonus video to get you ready to either draft or play Sealed with Ultimate Masters. In this video, I'm going to look at the archetypes in Ultimate Masters. I'm going to look at each two-color pair and talk about what each is going to be best at and what direction the cards are pushing you in. While we are going to talk about a lot of cards in this video, cards that are just good in every deck, like Premium Removal, don't come up here much unless they happen to have some special synergy in a particular color pair. If you just want to know what the best cards in this set are, you can check out my video on the best commons and uncommons. Because this video is so long, you can find timestamps in the description below for each archetype. Before we look at our first color pair, I think it's important to note that there is a lot of overlap between various colors in this set, which means that playing three colors will make sense some of the time. Let me show you what I mean. So, all the Abzan colors have a lot of stuff going on with graveyards. They all come at it a little bit differently, but they're all interested in doing things with their graveyard. All the Naya colors are interested in the heroic mechanic. These are going to be the colors that are going to be the more aggressive ones, because heroic really pushes you to be aggressive. The Bant colors have a lot of auras. There's lots of good auras in this set. They all have totem armor, or a lot of them do, and that makes it a lot better than your typical aura. And there are payoffs for playing auras in all three of those colors. And in Grixis is where you have most of the cards with Madness. Now, you may see that there's even overlap between the overlap. For example, doing stuff with your graveyard and Madness are things that go together pretty well. And heroic and auras are things that go together pretty well. Each color pair does have its own identity, but it's pretty easy to overlap with other colors when you're drafting. And in a lot of ways, that could allow you to end up in a more powerful deck. Now, let's look at our first color pair. First up, we're going to look at Black-White, which is a Reanimator deck. Each color in this set has multiple sort of signpost cards, cards that are specifically in that color pair, and they're sort of supposed to indicate to you what direction you're supposed to go in. For Black-White, we have two of those. One of them is Angel of Despair, which obviously costs black and white mana, just a big scary flyer that is efficient already, though not super easy to cast, and destroys permanents. And the other one is Burial Rites, which has a white flashback cost and is essentially a black-white card. Both of these cards are pushing you in the same direction. They're pushing you towards building a Reanimator deck. Trying to cast Angel of Despair isn't nearly as good as bringing it back for 5 mana with Burial Rites and also getting to destroy a permanent. So, one of the key things for a Reanimator deck is it needs to be able to fill up its graveyard. Let's look at the ways at common and uncommon that the black-white deck can fill up its graveyard. It can do it by discarding cards with things like Ication Crier, so if you have a great Reanimation card in your hand, like the Angel, you can discard it. Olivia's Dragoon, same sort of thing. Golgari Thug has Dredge, and Dredge is of course very powerful, and being able to load up your graveyard with a bunch of cards is great, especially if you're trying to hit a Reanimation target. And in the course of Burial Rites, even if you hit it when you're milling, you can at least cast it from your graveyard. Buried Alive, this is really going to be the only deck for this card because no one else wants to pay 3 mana to put 3 creatures into their graveyard. It just doesn't do enough in most decks. But in this deck, it may actually be something you want to run because you want to be able to hit your awesome Reanimation targets and get them in your graveyard as quickly as possible. Ghoulsteed's nice because he not only can do stuff from your graveyard if he gets milled, but he also lets you throw stuff into your graveyard. Crow of Dark Tidings lets you mill 4 cards in addition to being a relatively efficient flyer. Patchwork Gnomes gives you another way to discard cards. Grave Strength isn't one that I love, but it does let you mill some cards off the top of your library, and it may even make your creature bigger. Last time we saw it, it was in a set where loading up your graveyard and Reanimation weren't that awesome, and certainly a card like Grave Strength wasn't, and as a result, it didn't see much play. So in this new setting, it may be better than I'm expecting. There's also Dakmor Salvage a land, but it also has Dredge. So how do you go about reanimating stuff in this color pair? Well, there are several ways at Uncommon. One of them, Burial Rites, which we already saw. Another, Miraculous Recovery, which, keep in mind, is an instant speed reanimation spell, so it can let you hit a powerful reanimation creature, a creature you want to get back from your graveyard, at instant speed. It even makes it bigger. Sometimes, getting back your Angel, who can destroy permanents at instant speed, is going to be great because you can destroy their permanent in response to something. You can also sort of flash a creature into play from your graveyard and block, so it's pretty nice. There's also Resurrection, which is actually at common, and that's pretty great. It doesn't do anything special, but it's common, and it does it fairly efficiently. There's also Apprentice Necromancer, who does need to stick and play for a turn. After that, though, he can bring things back from your graveyard. Keep in mind they only attack once and then go back to your graveyard. So getting something like the Angel is nice because you will hit your opponent for 5, and you'll kill their best permanent. So what do we want to be reanimating? Well, obviously Angel of Despair is near the top of the list, but there's also some Eldrazi around. One of them is Artisan of Kozilek. It can actually also reanimate stuff if you want to actually have to cast it. But getting to 9 mana is not going to be that easy. I think most of the time it's just the kind of thing you reanimate and start attacking with. Either of the Eldrazi with Annihilator is also good to bring back with the Necromancer because they attack, they can do a bunch, and they make your opponent lose some permanence. But they're good to reanimate with anything. Similarly, we have Ulamog's Crusher. Also probably not going to cast real frequently, but when you can reanimate it, it's going to be pretty scary. I mean, you could have it in play as early as turn 4. You can even go outside of your 2 base colors of black and white, because if you're good enough at milling and discarding cards, you never have to worry about it getting stuck in your hand. So something like Penumbra Worm at uncommon is also a nice reanimation target, especially because you can reanimate it and then it leaves behind a friend if your opponent does kill it. There's also Shriekmaw, who's sort of, not big and scary like the rest of these. He's a little more like the Angel in that he's evasive and he can destroy things when he comes into play. He's nice too because you can evoke it on turn whatever and kill something for 2, and then later in the game you can get it back with a reanimation spell and get that trigger all over again and get to keep the 3/2. So there's also a bunch of other graveyard things going on in black-white that synergize well with a deck that wants to fill its graveyard. There are things with flashback, like Chainer's Edict, so if you accidentally mill it or whatever, you can still cast it from your graveyard in the late game. Death Denied can allow you to return multiple creatures. Ghoulcaller's Accomplice is a nice little 2-drop, and if you mill it, hey, you can just exile it and get a 2/2 later in the game. Gurmag Angler likes lots of cards in the graveyard. Obviously, Delve doesn't really work super well if you're trying to reanimate something, but your graveyard's going to be filled with other nonsense in addition to what you want to reanimate, so a card like Gurmag Angler is going to be nice. Moan of the Unhallowed is a nice, efficient card that also happens to have flashback, so it can come back from the graveyard. Song of the Damned. If there is a way in this format to cast a huge Eldrazi, maybe this is it. It does allow you to add a bunch of mana to your mana pool. I'm not entirely sold on it, but it does seem to have some potential. Sanitarium Skeleton, nothing special, but he can come back from your graveyard. Grave Scrabbler has Madness, and if you cast it using the Madness, it does a good impersonation of Gravedigger. Tetmos High Priest, also actually a way to reanimate stuff that we didn't talk about earlier. You do have to target it, and it's a very narrow form of reanimation, but it is graveyard synergy. Lotus Eye Mystics can get you back auras. Ancestors Chosen can gain you a bunch of life. So there are a lot of rares that are good for this particular deck. Some of the best reanimation targets are rares. You do have the Eldrazi at lower rarity who are like these huge haymakers you can throw, but having some of these rares is really going to push this deck over in terms of being able to do really heinous, degenerate things. One of those rares is Rhea Dawnbringer, so you can bring it back from the graveyard, and then for the rest of the game, she brings something back from the graveyard every turn, in addition to being a big flyer. Revelark is a little less degenerate, but still pretty great. I mean, it's a decent attacker. You can play it early, do some damage, maybe it dies or trades for something, and then when it dies, you get back 2 creatures from your graveyard, so it reanimates on its own. But if you can reanimate it, you're also going to get the same value when it dies again, and that's nice. Entomb is nice if you have some of those really incredible creatures that you need to throw into your graveyard and you need to reanimate them early. Entomb is one of the best, most efficient ways of doing it. It's not going to be good in any other deck in this format because no other deck really wants to throw a card into its graveyard for the cost of a card. It just doesn't do enough. But in this deck, say you have Rhea Dawnbringer or whatever, if you throw her into the graveyard early and reanimate her on turn 3 or 4, then things are going to get nuts. Goryo's Vengeance is a reanimation spell, but it's a very specific one. It can only reanimate legendary creatures. It does have Splice onto Arcane, and there are a few Arcane spells in the set, and if you can do that, that might be fun. But the reason it's kind of important is that it's an instant speed reanimation spell. This means it can actually reanimate the big Eldrazi who shuffle themselves back into your deck if they do go into your graveyard, because you can cast the Vengeance in response and get the creature back, and then you get to attack and get the Annihilator trigger and everything. There are enough legendary creatures in this set that I think it's good, but you really need to have several in your reanimation deck for it to be worth it, which I don't know how often that's going to happen, but it's worth noting just because of the Eldrazi thing. There's also Reanimate, which is probably just like the best pure reanimation spell in the deck. It can bring back anything for a single mana. Sure, it does damage to you, but if you discard Rhea Dawnbringer with Entomb on turn 1 and Reanimate her on turn 2, your opponent's going to be in a world of trouble. Sure, you lost 9 life, but it's going to kill them before it kills you. There's also Tasigur, who not only has Delve, so he works well with the idea that you're throwing cards in your graveyard, but he also loads up your graveyard for you. He's a graveyard engine, sort of, who throws stuff into your graveyard and lets you get cards back. The one sort of downside about him is your opponent gets to choose what you get back, so if they make you return a reanimation thing, that's kind of annoying, a creature you want to reanimate, but it's still pretty good. There's also off-color things that aren't black-white but are well-suited to this deck, because if your deck is good enough at throwing things in the graveyard, it doesn't matter if the cards you're reanimating are the same colors, are black and white. And Balefire Dragon's an example of that. If you reanimate it early, it's going to do insane things to your opponent. They're basically never going to develop their board, and they're just going to die. Woodfall Primus, another nice thing to reanimate. It has a nice Enter the Battlefield trigger. It has Persist, so it gets to do that twice. It's also just a big attacker. There's also the Eldrazi, who I already mentioned. It's worth noting, again, there's only 2 spells in this set that can reanimate them, the 2 instant speed ones. Goryo's Vengeance, and the white one that brings it back for 5 mana and puts a counter on it. Those are the only ways you can reanimate them, because otherwise they go into the graveyard and disappear. Alright, so we're starting sort of with the graveyard heavy decks. Black-white is the one that's going to be best at reanimating. The next one we're going to look at is black-green, which I've sort of called just the black-green graveyard deck. So what's different? Well, it kind of wants to do the same thing. It wants to load the graveyard, but it doesn't have access to the same number of reanimation spells. You don't have white. Now remember, you could just make an Abzan deck if your mana's good enough, and that'll be pretty good, but this deck uses the graveyard sort of as a resource. It wants you to have stuff in your graveyard so you can get benefits out of it, and Spider Spawning is sort of the embodiment of this deck. Spider Spawning, last time we saw it, was an incredibly powerful build-around, and it's going to be here too. It's not that hard to load up your graveyard, and the great thing about Spider Spawning is if you do mill it off your deck, well, you can still flashback it from your graveyard. Casting it twice is obviously better, but that's what makes it so good. If you mill this win condition, you still get to cast it. So let's look at how this deck loads the graveyard. We've got more Dredge in green in the form of Golgari Brown Scale. You also have Satyr Wayfinder, who's great because he throws a bunch of cards in your graveyard and makes sure you hit a land drop. There's Wild Mongrel, who's more, discard. He lets you discard very specific things if you want to instead of just milling, but that is a way to beef up your graveyard if you need to. Crow of Dark Tidings, we already looked at, the black cards from black-white that are good at loading the graveyard are going to be good here too. Crow of Dark Tidings throwing 4 cards total in is nice. Golgari Thug again with the Dredge, Olivia's Dragoons with the discard, and Grave Strength, and Dakmor Salvage with Dredge. So, about half of these cards are the same as what the black-white deck wants, but there are different graveyard payoffs here because you have green. The best of which is probably Spider Spawning. You also have some nice delve stuff like Become Immense. Boneyard Worm gets bigger and bigger the more creatures that are in your graveyard. Brawn wants to be in your graveyard. He gives your whole team trample. It is worth noting, sometimes the right thing to do is just play it as a 4-mana 3/3 Trampler, which is a decent thing in Limited, and trade it and then get the trample. But other times, being able to get trample at instant speed by discarding that to a Wild Mongrel or something could be pretty awesome. Groundskeeper is not an exciting payoff, but hey, it lets you get lands back from your graveyard should you need them. And if you can keep getting back like Evolving Wilds, that's some nice value. Eternal Witness is nice. It lets you return things from your graveyard. It's a powerful card in general. So, if you mill something you don't want to, she can get it back for you. Got Hooting Mandrills, another card with Delve. There's also Verdant Eidolon, who is nice because it gives you some awesome fixing, but it can also come back from your graveyard if you cast gold spells. Pulse of Marasa lets you get things from the graveyard, just like Eternal Witness does. Although it is only creature or land, so it's obviously not quite as good. You then have the black payoffs that are the same. The Necromancer, one of the few ways that this deck can reanimate stuff. Sometimes that'll be worth it, but again, you're not going to be as consistent of a reanimation deck here. Death Deny lets you get stuff back. Accomplice, if it gets milled, you can do stuff with it. Ghoulsteed, same thing. Got the Flashback, the Delve, Sanitarium Skeleton. So this deck wants to really, really use the graveyard as a resource with Spider Spawning and Boneyard Worm sort of being the best examples of that, but there's a lot of graveyard stuff going on. So what rares are good in this deck? Well, one of them is the Golgari Mythic Rare, Lord of Extinction. He just gets bigger the more cards that are in all graveyards. You also have Tasigur, who's probably a little better here than in the black-white deck. First off, it's easier for you to have the right mana for him to use his inactivated ability. Second of all, you're not a reanimation deck, so your opponent can't return like your big creature that you can only reanimate to your hand when you use it. Tarmogoyf, you know, it's actually not that good in limited, but this is where it might be okay because you can load up your graveyard. Life from the Loam, a nice dredge engine that lets you get back lands. You can discard them to various effects and things like that, and that's a nice resource. Golgari Grave Troll, another creature who gets bigger the more things that are in your graveyard. He also comes with dredge. And there's also Vengevine, who brings itself back if you play 2 creature spells in 1 turn. Not the easiest thing, but obviously this deck could do it if any deck can. Alright, so the last graveyard heavy color pair is blue-black, and it's a self-mill / control deck. Forbidden Alchemy does the best job of embodying it. Obviously, both the black-white and the green-black decks also have self-mill elements. They're almost exclusively within black, though. Green has a couple things that it can do. But this color pair has the most ways to mill itself, and it also has the most ways of sort of getting paid off for milling itself. And Forbidden Alchemy is a good example of that. You know, it has flashback. So if it gets milled, you can use its ability, load up your graveyard even more. You can use it twice. It's great card selection. How does this color pair load the graveyard? Well, we have our friend Forbidden Alchemy. There's also Deranged Assistant, who helps you ramp while loading a graveyard. Sultai Skullkeeper throws a couple things away. Frantic Search lets you discard cards. And this color pair also has a lot of madness, so the discard effects have additional synergy with the madness. Dreamscape Artist, another way to discard cards that also helps you ramp and even fix. Skywing Aven, another way to discard cards. So what are the graveyard payoffs here? Well, we've got more delve, like Treasure Cruise, which is a great spell. You've got Stitch Drake, who demands a creature be in your graveyard to play it. Meringue River Prowler, who can come back if you control a black or green permanent. Laboratory Maniac, who can legitimately just win you the game if you have milled yourself completely out. Problem with it is it's a little scary, is sometimes you can play it and then your opponent kills it, and when you draw on your turn, you just die. Living Lore likes to use the graveyard. It likes spells in the graveyard. And Rise from the Tides is the same sort of thing. It likes spells in the graveyard. I think it may be the most legit win condition for this deck because it can mill itself a lot. It plays a lot of instants and sorceries that are removal and counter magic. And then you can cast this late and get like 6 or 7 zombies, and oftentimes that'll be enough to kill your opponent. Circular Logic is a counter spell that has madness and cares about the number of cards in your graveyard. I don't have all the madness cards listed here, but there are a lot of them in blue and black, and they're going to be pretty good in this particular deck. So what rares are good in this deck? Well, Visions of Beyond, this is basically the only deck with it. This will be the most proficient deck at throwing cards into the graveyard, and Visions of Beyond can sometimes turn into Ancestral Recall in this case. Snapcaster Mage likes the graveyard, but it is going to be good in all blue decks. Magus of the Bazaar helps you load your graveyard even more, helps you do stuff with madness. And Dig Through Time is just an awesome card draw spell, kind of like Treasure Cruise. Alright, so we're going from blue-black, which is a mill deck, a deck that cares about the graveyard, but it also has a madness sub-theme, and now we're going to another color pair that has madness stuff going on, and that is blue-red spells. This is an archetype we see all the time. Mystic Retrieval and Fire and Ice really embody it well here, and Blast of Genius to a lesser extent. This deck wants to play a lot of instants and sorceries, and it has reasons to do so. Things like Mystic Retrieval, which can essentially be a 2-for-1 in a deck that has enough instants and sorceries. Fire and Ice is at common, and it's a really powerful either removal spell, or it lets you tap things. It's nice and flexible and powerful. Alright, so what are the spell payoffs we're talking about? Well, first off, we have Mystic Retrieval, of course, which likes you to have instants and sorceries in your graveyard. We've also got Archaeomancer, who likes instants or sorceries in the graveyard. Our friend Living Lore again, who can take spells, equal their converted mana cost and power and toughness, and when it hits an opponent, it does combat damage to anything. You can sack it and have it cast the spell. Sometimes it's just nice to have like a 4-mana 6/6 or whatever, depending on what you discarded or have in your graveyard. But other times actually casting the spell is worth it. Rise from the Tides, while it's good in the Dimir deck, this deck isn't as good at milling itself, but it is good at playing instants and sorceries. It's going to play more of them than the Dimir deck, chances are. And for that reason, you won't have to mill as much of your deck to have Rise from the Tides be good. You'll cast 6 or 7 instants and sorceries over the course of a game, and then Rise from the Tides will be worth it. It's also Whirlwind Adept, which has Hexproof, but also Prowess. That's the spell payoff part. And then in red, you have what are probably the best spell payoffs for this color pair. I think Thermo Alchemist is incredible. We've seen it recently in one of the Return to Zendikar sets. or maybe it was returned to Innistrad. Either way, we've seen it recently, and it can tap and do damage to an opponent, and that's already a pretty decent card. It gives you some reach, but being able to cast an instant or sorcery and untap it isn't all that hard. Its best friend is going to be Young Pyromancer. Playing a deck with both of these, like 2 copies of both of these, is like my dream. Being able to make elemental tokens and doing a bunch of damage to your opponent with Thermal Alchemist while you're casting card draw spells and stuff is pretty awesome. So as I mentioned, this color pair does have a Madness sub-theme. Let's look at the cards with Madness real quickly. We've got Reckless Worm, who's just a nice, efficient creature if you can Madness it into play. Malevolent Whispers, probably going to be a little better in a more aggressive deck, but it could work here. Fiery Temper is good in any deck, but between being a spell and having Madness, it's nice here. Circular Logic, probably not quite as good here as in Dimir, but still passable. And Just the Wind, which is going to be really nice. Being able to discard it to some effect and bounce something for 1 blue is great. So how do we discard cards here? Well, we've seen some of them. We've seen Dreamscape Artist, we've seen Skywing Haven, we've seen Frantic Search, but there's also Spark Spitter and Mad Prophet and Faithless Looting, all of which do stuff, you know, looting and rummaging while you get an effect, and then if you discard something and have mana, well, then you're going to get a lot of value with the Madness. Alright, so what rares are good in this spell deck? Well, we have Snapcaster Mage again. It's going to be good in any deck, but this deck is going to have a lot of instants and sorceries. Talrand will be really good in this deck, probably also in the Dimir deck to be fair, but being able to make a 2/2 flyer every time you cast an instant or sorcery spell is great. So we've gone from 2 decks that sort of have Madness as a sub-theme, and now we're going to go into a deck that is more Madnessy than the other 2, and that is Black-Red, where Garna the Blood Flame is sort of our signpost uncommon. Obviously, it doesn't have Madness, it doesn't help you discard things. It's just a very good creature who, you know, has Flash, gives your whole board haste, and lets you return to your hand all creature cards in your graveyard that were put there from anywhere this turn. So how does that fit in here? Well, this color pair has a lot of ways to discard cards for value, and if you can do that for some effect, then play Garna and get back whatever you discarded, that's pretty good. So while it's a Madness deck, it's also sort of a discard deck, and Garna will work well in it. I do think it's worth noting, I think there's also a secondary Black-Red archetype that we're going to talk about, one that focuses on sacrificing, but for now let's talk about the Madness. So how do we discard cards? Well, we have our friend Spark Spitter again, who lets you discard something and make a Spark Elemental. Mad Prophet, who lets you rummage. Faithless Looting, which lets you loot twice because of flashback. We've also got Ghoul Steed, who lets you discard stuff into the graveyard. And Olivia's Dragoon, which lets you discard things. So, you know, giving it flying and also casting a card with Madness, like Fiery Temper, is some great value. So let's look at the Madness. Well, we've got Grave Scrabbler, which is kind of a really nice Madness, because if you do manage to cast him for Madness, he becomes a very efficient Gravedigger. Granted, if you pay 4 for him, he's just a horrible creature, so you do need to have a lot of ways of discarding, but the fact that he gets you something back from your graveyard and he's a 2-mana 2/2 when you use Madness is great. Twins of More Estate, less complicated, but it's a cheap, efficient creature that if you can play it on turn 3, you're going to be pretty happy. Reckless Worm, same thing. Malevolent Whispers, probably a little better here. I think this deck will be a little more aggressive. Anger doesn't have Madness, but it wants to be in your graveyard to give your whole team haste. Fiery Temper we've already looked at too. Going to be a great thing to Madness. So that's sort of the Black-Red Madness discard deck, but I think what's going to be the most fun with this color pair is to build a Furnace Celebration deck. Now, Furnace Celebration for me is one of my favorite build-arounds ever in any limited format, so seeing it again is great. Furnace Celebration is what we have here. It is all about sacrificing. If you sacrifice permanents and pay 2, you get to shock something. Now, the reason I say this is a Furnace Celebration deck is because there aren't really very many other payoffs for sacrificing things, not enough to make it worth it. Worth noting, though, that Garna works really well here, too, because you can sack stuff, then get it back, play it again, and so forth. But there's not enough sacrifice payoffs. I'm going to show you the ones that there are when we come through, but what there is a lot of is creatures who sacrifice themselves for effect. So if you sack a creature, get an effect, and do this, you're getting some serious value. Let me show you what I mean. So we've got Generator Servant, who makes mana after sacrificing itself, sort of pays for Furnace Celebration even. There's also Hissing Iguanar, which is one of the few sacrificey payoffs. If you have a bunch of creatures to sacrifice and you're doing Furnace Celebration plus Iguanar, that's going to be pretty great. We've got Ingot Chewer, who if you evoke, and this is true of all the evoke creatures, technically sacrifices itself after it blows up the artifact, and that means you can pay 2 for Furnace Celebration. Magma plus Furnace Celebration is like a dream. You get to do 3 damage at a time for 3 mana. We've got our friend Spark Spitter, who makes a Spark Elemental every turn, and that Elemental sacrifices itself, so that counts too. Bloodflow Connoisseur is the only really free way to sacrifice over and over again multiple things, and maybe the best enabler for Furnace Celebration. There's also Fume Spitter, who puts a counter on something. We've got Shriek Maw, who comes with Evoke. Slum Reaper, who makes you and your opponent sacrifice something. Murderous Redcap I have here not because it sacrifices itself, but because if you do sack it to something like Bloodflow Connoisseur or Slum Reaper, you get to do it again. So I think this is maybe the best thing that the black-red deck can do, and it can obviously be a mix of those things. The problem is it really hinges on having Furnace Celebration, and yeah, if there's only one person drafting the deck at the table, that's probably doable, but there are going to be times where it's not so good. All right, so let's look at our next sort of discard-heavy color pair, sort of madness-heavy color pair, and that is red-green, which is an aggro deck, but it has a discard sub-theme. So we've got both Brawn and Anger, which is sort of a pair that indicates to you what this deck wants to do, and that is not only have nice aggressive creatures, but get stuff into your graveyard so that you can give all your stuff haste and trample. We've also got Wild Hunger, which has flashback, so if you do discard it, you can use it from your graveyard. It's also just a decent combat trick, though honestly it's not an incredible one, and a little underwhelming compared to most of the other flashback cards we got. I mean, compare that to Spider Spawning. Anyway, so what cards are there that you can discard for value? Well, we've got our cards with madness, like Fiery Temper, Malevolent Whispers, Reckless Worm, and now also Basking Rootwalla in green, which is one of the best things to discard to madness because it's free. So all you have to do is discard it, you get a free effect from whatever you did, and, by the way, you get a free creature who can pump itself up to a 3/3. Then there's Brawn and Anger, not to mention Wild Hunger. There's also Firewing Phoenix you can discard early and then get back. So how does this deck discard stuff? Why does it want to discard stuff? I think the best sort of discardy card in this color pair is probably Wild Mongrel, just because it's already an incredible card. That's kind of a downside too, because every green deck wants it, because people have to respect how much damage it can do, even if they don't know whether you want to discard. And if you combine him with Madness, he just gets absurd. There's also Faithless Looting that we've seen. You know, the other cards are all red discard things that we've seen already. Mad Prophet, Spark Spitter. So those are the primary ways you have to discard. Note that they are all common, though. So what are rares that are good in this deck? Well, Squeeze, pretty good. He just keeps coming back. You get to keep discarding him. And Fauna Shaman is a discard outlet that's also a tutor, and that's pretty good. All right, so red-green is a pretty aggressive deck. Now we're going to move into the sort of subset of color pairs that really like Heroic, and they're all pretty aggressive, as you might expect. Worth noting that this deck, the red-green one, can also have heroic things going on. It has heroic in both the colors, but it doesn't have nearly as many ways of taking advantage of it, and we'll see why. So the first color pair we're going to look at that's heroic heavy is red-white, and it's not only a heroic deck, which Double Cleave is telling you to do, because you get a heroic trigger when you target something with a spell, and if you target your creature with heroic with this, you're going to get the boost and double strike, so combat tricks and the like are pretty good here in general. But there's also Rally the Peasants, which is really telling you, make sure your deck can go wide, make sure you can make tokens. So this is a token deck that has sort of a heroic sub-theme. I think it's a little less heroic than the other two color pairs we're going to look at that are more heroic heavy, but it does have a heroic thing going on. So first let's look at the tokens that make you want to play Rally the Peasants and, pay 6 to give your whole board +4, +0. Well, we've got Ication Crier, who's also a way to discard stuff, and red does have some madness, so there's some synergy. There's also Spirit Cairn, which I do think is a bit of a build-around, but if you combine that with Ication Crier and you pay 3 every turn to make a 1/1 on the ground and a 1/1 in the air, that's pretty sweet. But there are other cards, as we've seen in red, that help you discard, and there may be situations where you actually want to run Spirit Cairn, but I think most of the time it's going to kind of not do much. There's a Crowan Crusader who's sort of a good embodiment of this deck because he has heroic himself, and he makes tokens when you target him with something. There's Molten Birth, which for 3 mana makes 2 1/1s, which is mediocre, but there's a chance it comes back and you get to do it again, less mediocre. There's Young Pyromancer, who's not going to be as good here in blue-red as it is in blue-red because you're not going to have as many instants and sorceries, but because of heroic, you're actually going to have some, and because you want to make tokens with stuff like Molten Rebirth, you're going to have some. Plus, he makes tokens. So what are the payoffs for going wide? Well, one of the sweetest ones, I think, is Raid Bombardment, which makes it so all your small creatures do 1 damage to your opponent when they attack if they're small enough. Hissing Iguanar, also going to be good here because you're going to have lots of small creatures. Magma, also good here. It can turn tokens into damage. Rally the Peasants, and another card that's a good embodiment of the heroic plus the token theme is Phalanx Leader, who has heroic but also pumps your whole board. And keep in mind, you don't only have to be making tokens here. You're just an aggressive deck who's playing out a bunch of creatures, but any card that makes more than one body is going to make cards like Rally the Peasants, Phalanx Leader, and Raid Bombardment way better. So that's why we specifically talked about tokens. So let's look at the other cards with heroic. We already have our friend a Crowan Crusader who makes a friend when you target him with something. There's also Arena Athlete who has the nice effect that red aggressive cards often have, in that it can make a creature unable to block. Those kind of effects can be so powerful on a lot of board states where even if your opponent has other blockers, none of their blocks are good after you get the best one out of the way. Hero of Iroas is nice because he gets bigger, but he also reduces the cost of auras, and auras are a good way of triggering heroic, so it sort of works double here. There's also Tethmos High Priest, who's less aggressive than his friends, but if you target it and you're getting back your Arena Athlete or whatever, that's pretty good. We have Wingsteed Rider, who's got evasion and gets bigger, and of course, Phalanx Leader, who makes your whole board bigger. So how do we trigger heroic? Well, there are combat tricks that do it, like Double Cleave. There's also some more creative ways you can do it. One of them being Nightbird's Clutches, which is going to be particularly nice in this deck because sometimes making your opponent's stuff unable to block is just going to win you the game anyway. But other times you can target your own creatures and get two powerful heroic triggers going. And it has flashback. I wouldn't recommend running a bunch of them, but I think this deck probably wants one of these every single time. There's also Reckless Charge, which isn't a combat trick because it's not instant speed, but it does let you target things a couple times with one card, so 2 heroic triggers from one card. There's Soul's Fire, which is going to be excellent because it's a removal spell. You target your own creature with it, you get a heroic trigger, then you kill something or do damage to your opponent. There's also God's Willing, which can save your creature from damage, can make it unblockable if you give it the right protection, and you get the Scry, plus a heroic trigger. There's also Repel the Darkness, which is kind of like the white version of Nightbird's Clutches. You can use it to tap down your opponent's stuff, which most of the time is probably what you want to do, right? But other times, if 2 heroic triggers are more impactful, you can do that instead. So let's look at the rares that are good here. Well, Revelark is good in basically any white deck, but you're going to have a lot of smaller creatures here, so when it dies, it'll bring them back. Seize the Day I have here, not only because it's nice and sort of an aggressive deck, but also because it has flashback and you can get 2 heroic triggers out of it. And Sublime Archangel, kind of like Revelark, it's going to be good in every white deck in this format, but this one probably has the best ability to go wide, and that means Exalted is going to be extra powerful when it's on all of your creatures. So that's red-white, which is sort of a go-wide, aggro, heroic thing. Let's look at green-white now. I think green-white is going to be the best at triggering heroic, and a large part of that is Travel Preparations. This is another powerful card with flashback we've seen in the past, and it was excellent then, and it's going to be excellent here. The reason it helps enable heroic deck is because for 4 total mana, it gives you 4+1/+1 counters, which potentially includes giving you the ability to trigger 4 things with heroic. Even without heroic, paying 4 mana for 4+1/+1 counters is an excellent deal, and that's what makes this card so good. But when you add heroic in, it can get a little bit ridiculous, and for that reason, I think this deck could be pretty awesome. So let's look at the heroic here. Heroic is definitely more of a central theme here. So we've got heroic cards in green, like Staunch-Hearted Warrior, who is nice because he puts 2 counters on himself when he gets targeted. Hero of Lena Tower is a nice cheap creature with heroic that can sort of adjust how large it gets depending on how much mana you have up. We also have our white cards with heroic we've already seen, but I think they're going to be better here. Hero of Iroas will be better here because, as we'll see, there's more auras. Tethmos High Priest, probably about as good here. Wingsteed Rider, probably about as good too. And Phalanx Leader, also probably about as good. So really only the hero's better. But you do have access to 6 cards with heroic. So how do you trigger heroic here? Well, you can do it with combat tricks like Become Immense, which can be particularly nice because it can come out of nowhere. But you've also got access to powerful auras here, and like Boar Umbra. If you know me, you know I'm not usually big on auras, but Totem Armor auras are sort of a completely different animal. This is because most auras put you at a great risk for getting 2-for-1'd. And yes, you don't want to cast this when your opponent has mana up and a card or cards in their hand because you could still get 2-for-1'd, but after this attaches to your creature, it does not give you a 2-for-1 anymore. Your opponent can try to kill the creature, but the Umbra falls off first. So you avoid one of the big pitfalls of auras, which is getting 2-for-1'd. And green and white have a bunch of these totem armor auras, and that's going to power it up in terms of heroic. It's also going to make Hero of Eroas a lot better. There's also a combat trick like Shed Weakness, which also has some silly synergy with cards that have Persist. Prey Upon, that's a great card to trigger heroic because it's a removal spell that gives you a heroic trigger. Snake Umbra, another great Umbra. This one doesn't make your creature as big, but it gives you a powerful damage trigger. You get to draw a card. Spider Umbra, efficient for what it gives you. It protects your creature while also making it +1/+1 in reach. We've also got access to Double Cleave here, God's Willing, Repel the Darkness again. White also brings some more auras to the table, like Conviction, which can actually let you trigger heroic over and over again if you have enough mana. Hyena Umbra, another one with totem armor that gives a nice boost. Mammoth Umbra, maybe the worst of the group just because it's less efficient but still playable. There's also Daybreak Coronet, which is going to be really only good in this deck and the blue-white deck. Those are the two decks that can really cram as many auras in as possible. And you need a lot of them to make Daybreak Coronet work, but when it does work, it's awesome. So green-white is about heroic, and Traveler's Preparation is one of the key cards, being able to trigger heroic as many times as possible. And there's also an aura thing going on. I think the blue-white deck is going to be even better with auras, but it's also a heroic deck. Here we have sort of a pair of cards that sort of push you towards aura payoffs. One of them is Heliod's Pilgrim, which is a great card because if your deck has auras, and it will, because there's lots of them that are actually good in this set, and the Pilgrim can even search up aura that's removal, like Faith's Fetters. So the Pilgrim draws you auras. The Iridescent Drake gets you back auras that have fallen in the graveyard, and it already has evasion. So let's look at the auras here that these two cards are asking us to play. So what auras do you have access to here? Well, you have the white ones we've already talked about, like Conviction, which gives you multiple triggers. You've got Hyena Umbra, and you've got Mammoth Umbra. On top of that, you have Shielding Plaques, which can draw you a card and make a creature essentially hexproof, which means putting more auras on it is a lot safer. There's also Unstable Mutation, which is a very aggressive aura that makes a creature huge and then slowly shrinks it. Flight of Fancy, which draws you multiple cards and gives evasion. Eel Umbra, another totem armor one. So being able to search your library for any of these is great, and I don't have Faith's Fetters here, even though obviously it's good too, but it's not going to be triggering heroic for you. So what are the aura payoffs? Well, we already know a couple of them, Iridescent Drake and Heliod's Pilgrim. There's also Hero of Eroas, who we've also already seen, who will be quite good here. And there's also Lotus Eye Mystics, who, like the Drake, can return an enchantment from your graveyard. It only returns it to your hand, though. It also has Prowess, so every time you cast an aura, it gets bigger. So who do we want to enchant? Well, Hero of Eroas, of course, because he has heroic. Phalanx Leader, because it has heroic. Tethmos High Priest, because it has heroic. We've seen these. Winged Steed Rider, because it has heroic. I have Wandering Champion here. It's not like it has evasion or heroic or anything, but this is probably the right deck for it because it makes it so that if you control a blue permanent of some kind, it lets you loot. And, putting Flight of Fancy or something on it seems like a pretty sweet way to go. But the thing you really have access to is you have these nice heroic creatures, but you've also got creatures with hexproof, namely Whirlwind Adept and Slippery Bogle, who are both excellent places to stick auras because, they can't target them with anything. So the 2-for-1 threat is even less of an issue than it was before. So what rares are good here? We've got Daybreak Coronet again. We've also got Sovereigns of Lost Alara, who's a decent-sized creature with Exalted. And every time one of your creatures attacks alone, you get to search your library for an aura and just slap it onto the creature. And you saw some of those auras. They're pretty scary. So next we're going to look at Blue-Green, which is a sort of a weird deck. It's another one that I think has two different routes you can take, kind of like Black-Red. But it doesn't really fit into the other sort of color pair things as well. It cares about auras, but it doesn't have nearly as much heroic. So it's a little bit of a different animal, but it's more about hexproof. It's more about putting your auras on hexproof things or giving things hexproof with Shielding Plaques. Obviously, these cards can be played in the other aura decks too because of hybrid mana. This sort of seems to be one of the directions to take Blue-Green in. You've got Shielding Plaques as an aura, you've got Eel Umbra, Flight of Fancy, all things we've seen before. These good auras that have totem armor. You have several of them, and you have some nice aggressive ones like Unstable Mutation. So who do you want to enchant? Well, Slippery Bogle, Whirlwind Adept. Meringue River Prowler is an interesting one here because it's unblockable, and you're usually going to have a green permanent, so you can cast it back from your graveyard. And being unblockable and having totem armor is a nightmare for your opponent. Iridescent Drake is here. You've also got access to a bit of heroic and Staunch-Hearted Warrior. Safehold Elite is a nice thing to enchant, not because it has heroic or anything, but because it keeps a 2-for-1 from happening as brutally because of Persist. Kitchen Finks is just a great card in general, but it does sort of the same thing. So I think this is one route you can take, but I actually think Blue-Green Ramp is going to be like the more real deck. And Urban Evolution sort of embodies that. You know, blue-green decks in limited formats are often decks that are sort of good stuff decks that can ramp and play multiple colors, and I think that's what we have here. Urban Revolution draws you a bunch of cards and lets you play an additional land. Those are things blue-green wants to do. So how does this deck ramp? Well, you've got Urban Evolution, which is only sort of ramp. You have to have the land, right? But if you draw 3 cards, you're probably going to have it. It's also pretty late for ramp. But you have more than that. You've got Deranged Assistant, who also mills, but in this case you care more about the mana. Dreamscape Artist, who also gives you fixing, which is important because I think this deck has enough fixing in the 2 colors that it can play multiple colors if it really wants to. Devoted Druid, another card with ramp. Kodama's Reach, another card like the Artist that can search your library for basic lands. Verdant Eidolon, another great source of fixing. Also likes gold cards, and splashing gold cards in this deck could be good. You've also got Vessel of Endless Rest, which you can, of course, play in any deck you want to play it in, but this is probably the best home for it. It gives you more fixing. There's also Mage Ring Network, which is sort of a storage land. So the question is, what do you have to ramp into? Well, you have some stuff. You've got Mahamati Djinn. If you can play that earlier than turn 6, it's going to be a problem. Same with Ether Snipe. Same with Penumbra Worm and Walker of the Grove, who gives you a ton of value because it leaves a friend behind. But because you can play as many colors as you want, there's also a lot of powerful things that you can splash. You can basically start taking all the premium cards, even though they're not your primary colors, once you have Dreamscape Artist and Kodama's Reach on board. So some of the stuff you can splash includes Faith's Fetters, a premium removal spell, Shriekmaw, maybe the best non-rare in the set, Vengeful Rebirth, a great source of card advantage. It gives you a 2-for-1, gets you something back from your graveyard, and Reviving Vapors, which is another sort of control-y card that can buy you time to ramp through the life you gain, and if you're a ramp deck, you're going to have some high converted mana cost creatures, so gaining yourself a lot of life and drawing cards seems pretty good. So what are the rares that blue-green has? Well, you've got our friend Tasigur. Yes, I know he's black, but remember, this deck can play multiple colors, and Tasigur's activated ability works well here. We've got Woodfall Primus, who we've seen before. Noble Hierarch, who helps you ramp, so that's nice. Sovereigns of Lost Alara, you can splash it, and if you have a few auras in your deck, you're good to go. Platinum Empyrean, which gives you a huge creature that has to be killed or you can't die. Mana Vault's good in literally every single deck in the format, but hey, if you get this plus all the other ramp, is a serious potential for doing some insane ramp things early in the game. So that is all the color pairs. I think this format looks like a lot of fun. I'm looking forward to drafting it, and the next few weeks, I'm going to be doing it for my 2 draft videos a week. If you enjoyed this video, don't forget to like it and share it so others can enjoy it too. If you want to make sure you catch future videos about limited formats and draft videos in this format, don't forget to subscribe and click the bell icon to make sure you stay notified. Thanks for watching.